The Greatsword is an old friend. It has been with us since the very beginning, starting from Demon Souls all the way to Elden Ring. Interestingly enough, it has always been called Greatsword, but it is an Ultra Greatsword, or in Elden Ring, a Colossal Sword. This weapon is arguably the best colossal sword in the game, providing us with the highest base AR of the weapon type as well as the furthest reach. It is both the strongest and the longest, a powerful combination. This is clearly a strength type weapon as shown by both its base C scaling in strength and its hefty 31 strength requirement. This weapon provides us with standard and pierce type damage. Regular attacks cover wide arcs that helps us deal with multiple enemies, and then we also have the support of a few thrusting attacks from rolling or crouching positions. This makes the weapon versatile, but it is also important to remember that it continues to be a very large sword, and as such, it will be on the slower side. One final thing to note about this weapon is that it is actually not bad at blocking. With an 84% physical block and 56 base guard boost that we can turn into 61, it is not a bad strategy to block while two-handing the weapon and responding with a guard counter. This shouldn't be your main strategy, but it is one more option to consider. Overall, this is a powerful weapon that provides us with one very important aspect. It is fun. Finding the Greatsword is not difficult at all. There is only one way to get this weapon. It is located in northern Caelid, bordering the northeastern side of Limgrave. Our main point of interest is the Smoldering Church. This is the church where Anastasia the Tarnished Eater invades you for the first time. Starting at this site of grace, all you need to do is get on Torrent and begin traveling east, following the path. Keep on the road, jump over the Ember Wall, and take a quick left. Continue on the road, and you will eventually come across one of the many noble carriages that are scattered throughout the lands between. This one seemed to be attacked and abandoned. There will be a few giant T-Rex dogs and a giant crow around the area, so it might be difficult to clear the enemies depending on your level. Nevertheless, whether you decide to deal with the enemies or rush past them, you need to go towards the back of this carriage and jump on the platform. Here you will see a chest, and inside of it is the Greatsword. Now, as this weapon has one single fixed location and cannot be farmed, we are limited to one of them per playthrough. Enjoy it! The one-handed moveset of the Greatsword is certainly not the highlight of the weapon. I believe that there is a higher focus on the two-handed capabilities of this armament. Nevertheless, there are a few notes that we can make in case you want to run this with a shield. First, the first strike in the R1 combo has really quick hyper armor. Coming online at frame 8, it becomes a very good tool to trade hits with the enemies. Judging by the sheer power of the weapon, most trades should come out in our favor. And then, we should also look at the R2s that the Greatsword brings to the table. Both charged R2s provide a staggering 36 points of stance damage each, capable of breaking most enemies in 2 well-timed hits. It is good to also note that with damage level 6, the second charged R2 will leave enemies flat on the ground. This gives us more damage opportunities. That being said, the stars of the show when it comes to the one-handed moveset will always be crouch and rolling R1. These moves provide fast thrust type pokes with magnificent reach that serve to check enemies and punish their moves. These two moves were so good in fact that they have received nerfs throughout the game's history, and even after them they continue to be very efficient. We must remember one of the most important lessons in Elden Ring. Pokes are always good. Make sure to use them. Now, in a more PvE focused point, the mount R2s of the Greatsword are very good. Whether you charge it or not, they always have damage level 9, meaning that enemies will be launched into the air. This gives us a situation in which we can drive by an enemy, launch it into the air, and double back as it gets up in order to hit it again. We can do this until it's dead, and they cannot do anything about it. Moving on to the two-handed moveset, this is where the Greatsword shines, and in my opinion, this is the intended way to play with the weapon. The first thing to notice is the sheer power of the two-handed motion values. Look at them. 1.36 for a regular R2, 1.35 for a jump R2, an incredible 1.76 and 1.84 for charged R2s. That almost doubles the base power. Everything you do with this weapon while two-handing it will be extremely painful for the enemy. Even the run R2 is beefy. You just sprint towards an enemy and smack it over the head with a 1.38 motion value attack. Everything you do with this weapon while two-handing it is extremely satisfying. And still, I want to come back to the charged R2s on this thing. Each one of them offers almost 40 points of stance damage. That is incredible. To put it in perspective, 2 charged R2s and a throwing knife will break Millennia, and depending on how the game deals with rounding values, you might not even need the knife. It is pure carnage. And even after all of this, we still have to return to the two-handed crouch R1 and rolling R1. Again, pokes are always good in Elden Ring, and with this weapon they are doubly strong. The two-handed pokes share the same strength that I mentioned during the one-handed moveset, but I think that it is a good moment to mention one more thing. These two moves come with hyper armor. Crouch R1 has frame 10 hyper armor and roll R1 has frame 9 hyper armor. This is early and this is good. It allows us to take enemy attacks while keeping our offensive. They are aggressive and oppressive moves for those players that want to stick to their enemies. They are also very good for keeping stance damage up to achieve consistent breaks. In all honesty, I do not think that the dual wield moveset of the Greatsword specifically, and Colossal Swords generally, is very good. Not because it is not efficient, but more so because dual wielding Colossal Swords offers us very little additional value over, for example, two-handing the weapon. Overall, motion values and stance damage are very similar, and the hyper armor that we get from using two weapons is more or less the same as that which we get by two-handing one of them. On top of this, there is the added risk that, in order for dual-wield Colossal Swords to upkeep its efficiency, both attacks of the move must hit. If for some reason either the left or the right attack misses, our value goes out the window. In my opinion, it is always better to simply two-hand one Colossal Sword, unless you jump. Jumping L1 is a stance decimator and the damage it puts on the table is incredible. Spamming jump attacks is an incredibly good and incredibly efficient strategy. It is a legit answer to many of the game's enemies and should never be forgotten. This is even more true when we take into consideration that the game provides a whole support system for this strategy. Stacking the Claw Talisman with the Night Raptor's feathers will give the player a total of 26.5% additional damage on all jump attacks. Add a few more general buffs and the result will be thousands of damage each time that you jump. Doing this with Colossal Swords is not technically the best because Great Hammers and Colossal Weapons provide more stance damage on top of the carnage, but it is still very valid. If you like to jump around with two overly large swords on your shoulders, you will be a happy player. The final subject we need to cover is the damage dealing potential that this weapon has with all of the options that the game provides for us. Here in this chart you will find the specific AR information for a Greatsword with each infusion. For those infusions that focus on a single stat, the information is provided at the final soft cap of 80. For those infusions that focus on multiple stats, I show you the total AR while taking both stats to their second soft cap. It is obvious to see that the most efficient way to run this weapon is through the heavy infusion. It provides us with the highest amount of pure AR at 884 physical when two-handed, while keeping the ability to buff our weapon. Hit for hit, this is the way to obtain the highest amount of raw damage while maintaining the possibility of strategic adaptation. I am sure that you have noticed that it is possible to obtain a higher total AR value with an elemental infusion. While this is true, I consider this to be quite the trap. Accepting that the AR is higher, the difference is minimal, about 5% in the best of cases, and the damage is split with an element. Split damage must go through multiple defenses and negations, meaning that it will generally yield less damage compared to pure damage type sources. On top of this, Getting good elemental scaling means that we will have to commit to a larger investment, as we need both strength to equip the weapon and the corresponding damage stat for the elemental scaling. This really increases the rune level burden of any build. That being said, I do want to highlight the cold infusion. With a very reliable B scaling in strength, this infusion can provide us with dependable damage. The intelligence scaling with this infusion can be completely ignored, and we can focus on a pure strength character that can take advantage of a high AR weapon with incredible inherent frostbite. The damage we would get from a cold infusion will always be less, but this will be balanced and even outweighed by the effects provided from the frostbite status. It is certainly something worth exploring. As you can see, the Greatsword is a specialist type weapon. It specializes in strength, it specializes in damage, and most importantly, it specializes in fun. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope that I get to see you on the next one.